No one at the courthouse expected her to arrive with a newborn. Divorce days usually came with stiff folders, tight expressions, and rehearsed calm. People arrived alone or flanked by lawyers, not cradling new life against their chest, not wrapped in a soft blanket that rose and fell with each quiet breath. But she did. She stepped onto the courthouse stairs slowly, as if the ground itself deserved respect for what it was about to witness. The baby slept peacefully in her arms, unaware that his presence alone was enough to fracture old truths and expose unspoken regrets. Across the street, a black luxury sedan idled. Inside sat a man the business world admired, a millionaire CEO, a deal-maker praised for discipline and control, a man who never let emotion cloud judgment. Yet, in that moment, judgment was nowhere to be found, because the second he saw her, everything stopped. Before we go any further, let me ask you something important. Have you ever watched someone realize, too late, that silence cost them everything? Have you ever been the one waiting, hoping, believing that love would eventually show up, only to realize it never did? If stories about love, loss, and quiet strength speak to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're mirrors. And you might see yourself in this one. Her name was Niall Corwin. 3 years earlier, she had walked into this same building, holding papers that promised forever. She remembered the echo of her footsteps then. Light, hopeful, certain. Today her steps were slower, steadier, weighted not by fear, but by clarity. She adjusted the blanket around the newborn instinctively, shielding him from the morning breeze. The baby stirred slightly, then settled again, trusting the arms that held him. Niall inhaled. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't performance. This was simply her life, no longer hidden. Across the street, the sedan door opened. Calder Wynne stepped out. His suit was tailored to precision, pressed to perfection, the kind of man magazines described as unshakable. Founder and CEO of Windcrest Developments, a name attached to glass towers, expansion deals, and quiet authority. Beside him stood a woman equally composed. Sorrel Dane, elegant, polished, prepared. Her hand rested lightly on Calder's arm, a gesture meant to signal unity, reassurance, belonging. She stood close enough to be seen, close enough to be recognized. But Calder didn't look at her. Not once. His eyes were locked on Niall, and then, slowly, on the baby. Something passed across his face. Not anger, not shock in the way people expected. It was calculation, colliding with reality. Sorrel noticed the shift immediately. She tightened her grip slightly, as if anchoring him to the moment. But Calder didn't react. His posture remained composed, yet something deeper had fractured beneath the surface. Niall didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't accuse. She simply stood there. The baby stirred again, opening his eyes briefly. Dark, curious, innocent. Calder's breath caught. The resemblance was undeniable. But what unsettled him most wasn't the shape of the child's face or the familiarity of his features. It was the realization that Niel hadn't come here to explain. She hadn't come to demand answers. She hadn't even come to confront him. She had come to end something, while beginning something else entirely. And that, more than anything, stripped him of control. Have you ever noticed how life doesn't always break loudly? Sometimes it just stands in front of you, quiet, undeniable, holding proof that everything you ignored still mattered. Inside the courthouse, names were being called. Lawyers shuffled papers. A clock ticked steadily on the wall, indifferent to the weight of the moment unfolding outside. Niel shifted her weight gently, rocking the baby without thinking. Her movements were natural now, muscle memory shaped by sleepless nights and soft lullabies. Motherhood had not made her fragile. It had made her firm. 3 years earlier, she had loved Calder for his presence, for the way he listened, for how he made room for her words without rushing to fill the silence. Somewhere along the way, silence became his refuge, and hers became her breaking point. Calder took a step forward, then stopped. Sorrel's eyes flicked from Niel to the baby, then back to Calder. Questions formed, but never reached her lips. She was a woman accustomed to timing, to public composure, to waiting for the right moment. But moments don't wait forever. Niel finally met Calder's gaze. There was no bitterness in her eyes, only distance. That was when Calder understood the most painful truth of all. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a conclusion. And as the courthouse doors opened and their names echoed across the steps, one thing became clear. Some loves don't end because of betrayal. They end because one person stopped showing up, and the other learned how to walk away. Stay with me, because what led to this moment didn't begin with heartbreak. It began with presence. 3 years earlier, Niel Corwin believed in beginnings. Not the loud kind, the ones that arrived with celebrations and promises spoken too quickly, but the quiet ones, the kind that unfolded slowly, revealing themselves through consistency rather than spectacle. That was how she met Calder Wynne. The first thing she noticed wasn't his confidence or his ambition. It was how still he became when he listened. They were standing inside a half-finished office building on the east side of the city. Concrete floors exposed, wiring visible like veins along the ceiling. Niel had been brought in as a temporary interior consultant. 3 months, maybe less. No guarantees. No long-term commitment. Calder was already there when she arrived. Sleeves rolled up. Jacket draped over the back of a chair. He wasn't issuing orders or pacing the room. He was studying a blueprint, brow slightly furrowed, as if the paper were asking him a question. "You're Niel," he said, without looking up. She nodded, And you must be the man who refuses to approve anything beige. That earned his first smile. It wasn't polished. It wasn't practiced. It was surprised. "I don't hate beige," he said. "I just think it gives up too easily." Niel blinked, then laughed. It was an unexpected sound in a space filled with echoes and unfinished edges. That was the moment, not because it was dramatic, but because it was human. They began with logistics, timelines, budgets, materials, but conversations have a way of slipping their boundaries when two people are genuinely curious about each other. Calder asked questions that didn't feel like interviews. Niel answered without feeling examined. He wanted to know why she chose design over architecture. She asked why he preferred walking sites himself instead of delegating. Their answers overlapped more than either expected. Evenings stretched longer than planned, not because anyone demanded it, but because neither wanted to be the first to leave. Coffee cups multiplied. Blueprints were rolled and unrolled again, forgotten as conversations wandered into childhood memories, quiet disappointments, and dreams spoken carefully, as if naming them made them fragile. Niel learned that Calder carried pressure the way some people carried posture, always, invisibly, instinctively. He was admired, relied upon, watched. Expectations followed him into every room. With her, something shifted, not dramatically, just enough for him to exhale. When he laughed, it wasn't the controlled sound Niel later heard at public dinners. It was open, unguarded. When he spoke about the future, it wasn't about numbers or expansion. It was about balance, though he didn't yet know how to achieve it. They didn't rush. There were no declarations in the beginning. No sudden intimacy, just presence. He remembered small things, how she took her coffee, how she paused before answering questions that mattered, how she watched people when she thought no one noticed. Niel, in turn, saw the man behind the ambition. Though fatigue he masked, the way he carried responsibility, like a promise he could never put down. Their first dinner outside work happened almost accidentally. A late meeting, a missed reservation, a quiet restaurant still open past midnight. They talked until the chairs were stacked around them. When Calder walked her to her car, he didn't reach for her hand, didn't lean in. He simply said, "I'd like to do this again, without blueprints." She smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Love didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like a habit. Soon, Niel found herself looking forward to the way Calder knocked. Never rushed, never late. She learned the sound of his footsteps before she saw him. He learned the expressions she wore when she was tired, when she was thinking, when she was pretending not to care. They became a quiet refuge for each other. Calder stopped working through every night. Niel stopped carrying everything alone. They learned each other's rhythms, not perfectly, but honestly. When he finally told her he loved her, it wasn't rehearsed. They were standing in the same building where they had first met, now finished. Glass polished, floors complete, light pouring in through tall windows. "I don't want a perfect future," he said, voice steady, but eyes uncertain. "I want a real one. With you." Niel didn't hesitate. She said yes, because it felt true, not because it felt safe. Their marriage wasn't marked by spectacle. No grand venue, no cameras, no audience, just two people choosing each other with intention. At first, nothing changed, and then everything did. Calder's success accelerated. Contracts expanded. His name began appearing in places Niel never looked for it. The admiration grew louder. Expectations heavier. Niel adjusted. She reminded herself that ambition wasn't absence. That love could survive schedules. That patience was part of partnership. But patience, she would later learn, is not endless. The nights Calder didn't come home began stacking quietly, like papers left unread. The mornings he left before she woke became routine. Dinners were postponed, then canceled, then forgotten. He never raised his voice, never disrespected her, never stopped providing. But presence is not measured in provision. And slowly, the space between them filled with silence. Niel noticed first, not because Calder changed who he was, but because he stopped noticing who she was becoming. When she discovered she was pregnant, joy arrived before fear. Then fear followed closely behind. She waited for the right moment to tell him. A calm evening. No calls, no meetings, no interruptions. The moment never came. When she finally spoke, the words came out softly, almost apologetically, as if she were introducing a complication rather than a miracle. Calder froze, not in anger, in calculation, timing, public image, responsibilities. "We'll talk," he said. And he didn't. Silence grew, not from conflict, but from avoidance. Niel realized something important then, something she would carry with her long after the marriage ended. Silence is not neutral. It is a decision. Eventually, she made one too. She left quietly, without drama, without demands. And Calder didn't stop her. That was the answer. Now, standing on the courthouse steps 3 years later, Niel understood something she hadn't before. Some love stories don't end because people stop caring. They end because one person stops showing up. The other learns how to stop waiting. And the baby in her arms, the light she carried forward, was proof that even from quiet endings, something new can still begin. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever loved someone who slowly stopped showing up, or if you believe that silence can hurt more than words, please take a moment to like this video. It helps this story reach others who might need it. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Do you think love survives without presence, or is showing up everything? And if you're drawn to stories that explore love, choices and life lessons we rarely talk about. Subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson so you don't miss what comes next. Because this story is just beginning, and the hardest lessons are still ahead. Love didn't arrive in Niall Corwin's life as a dramatic turning point. It arrived quietly, so quietly, in fact, that she didn't recognize it at first. It looked like consistency. Calder Wynne began showing up without needing to announce himself. Not just physically, but emotionally. When Niall spoke, he didn't interrupt or redirect the conversation back to himself. He listened with his full attention, as though every word carried weight simply because it was hers. In a world where Calder was constantly required to decide, command, and lead, being with Niall allowed him to pause, and that pause mattered more than either of them realized at the time. They developed routines without naming them. Tuesdays became their late work nights, followed by quiet dinners at a small place near the river. Saturdays were for site visits that ended in long walks, conversations drifting far from architecture and budgets into reflections about childhood, fears they rarely admitted, and hopes neither had spoken aloud before. Niall learned that Calder's confidence didn't come from certainty. It came from preparation. He thought deeply, weighed outcomes, and carried responsibility with a seriousness that bordered on loneliness. The world admired his composure, but few noticed the pressure that shaped it. With her, he let that pressure ease. Not completely, just enough to breathe. They shared moments that never made it into photographs. Calder cooking clumsily in Niall's kitchen, sleeves rolled too high, laughing at his own mistakes. Niall sketching ideas at his dining table while he worked nearby. The silence between them comfortable rather than strained. Those moments taught her something important. Love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply stays. Calder remembered details others overlooked. The way Niall paused before answering difficult questions. The way she softened when she talked about things she cared deeply about. He noticed when she was tired, even before she admitted it. In return, Niall saw past the composed exterior Calder presented to the world. She recognized the man beneath the tailored suits, the one who carried expectations like a promise he was afraid to break. One evening, after a long day that had drained them both, Calder spoke without looking at her. Do you ever feel like you're expected to already know who you're supposed to become? Niall considered the question carefully before answering. I think we spend too much time trying to live up to expectations, she said softly, and not enough time listening to what actually makes us feel whole. Calder nodded, the words settling deeper than he expected. That night, he didn't rush home. He stayed, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Their relationship grew not through grand declarations, but through trust built slowly. Calder didn't overwhelm Niall with promises. Niall didn't demand reassurance. They allowed the relationship to unfold naturally, respecting its pace. There was an unspoken understanding between them. They chose presence over performance. When Calder's company secured a major project that would change everything, Niall was the first person he told. Not his investors, not his board. Her. They stood together in the unfinished space of what would soon become a landmark building. Sunlight streamed through open windows, dust particles floating like quiet witnesses. "I don't want to lose this," Calder said, honestly. "Whatever this is." Niall looked at him, not with certainty, but with faith. "Then don't disappear," she replied. At the time, it sounded simple, because at that stage, love was simple. They didn't know yet that success would test their bond, not by introducing conflict, but by slowly demanding more time, more attention, more sacrifice. For now, they were just two people choosing each other in the present moment. And that choice, made daily, without fanfare, felt enough. Looking back, Niall would realize that these were the moments that mattered most. The ones built on listening, shared silence, and the quiet assurance that neither of them felt alone. Love, she would learn, isn't sustained by promises alone. It's sustained by showing up, again and again, especially when life becomes louder than the heart. And for a while, Calder showed up. The first time Calder Wynne realized he was in love with Niall Corwin, there was no music swelling in the background, no dramatic realization that knocked the breath from his lungs. It happened on an ordinary evening. They were sitting on the floor of Niall's apartment, backs against the couch, takeout containers between them. The television hummed quietly in the background, forgotten. Niall was talking about a project that hadn't gone as planned, something small, almost forgettable. Calder wasn't thinking about work. He was watching the way her hands moved as she spoke, how her voice softened when she reached the parts of the story that mattered most to her. He noticed how comfortable the silence felt when she paused, how natural it was to simply exist in the same space. That was when it struck him. This wasn't excitement. It was peace. Calder had built his life around momentum, forward motion, constant growth, endless ambition. Yet, with Niall, he found something different, a sense of stillness that didn't feel like stagnation, but like grounding. He didn't say it out loud that night. Some realizations deserve time to settle. Instead, he showed it in the way he stayed longer, the way he rearranged his schedule without complaint, the way he listened, not to respond, but to understand. Weeks passed, then months. Love deepened quietly, reinforced by small acts rather than declarations. Calder learned Niall's rhythms. Niall learned his. They didn't try to change each other. They made space. One evening, Calder asked her to meet him at the site where they had first met. The building was finished now, glass polished, floors complete, light pouring in through tall windows that overlooked the city below. The place no longer echoed. It felt settled. Niall arrived just as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the skyline in warm hues. Calder stood near the center of the space, hands in his pockets, expression thoughtful. "I wanted you to see this," he said. "Not the building, the feeling." She looked around, then back at him. "What feeling?" "The one that reminds me where everything started." They walked together through the open space, footsteps soft against the finished floors. Calder spoke about the early days, how uncertain everything had been, how much pressure he'd felt to succeed, how meeting her had changed the way he experienced both work and life. Niall listened, heart steady. When they stopped near the windows, Calder turned to face her fully. "I don't want a future that looks impressive on paper," he said. "I want one that feels honest. I want someone who challenges me without trying to control me. Someone who reminds me why the work matters." Niall's breath caught, not because the words were dramatic, but because they were sincere. "I want a real life," Calder continued, "not just a successful one. And I can't imagine building that without you." There was no ring box, no audience, just two people standing in a space that held the memory of their beginning. Niall didn't cry. She smiled, a deep, knowing smile, and nodded. "Yes," she said simply. Their marriage followed the same philosophy. Quiet, intentional, unperformed. They didn't chase spectacle. They chose meaning. A small gathering, close friends, conversations that mattered more than photographs. Calder was present in those early months of marriage, truly present. He made time. He adjusted expectations. He shared the weight of decisions, rather than carrying them alone. Niall believed they had found a rhythm that could withstand pressure. And for a while, they had. But life has a way of testing even the strongest foundations, not through sudden storms, but through gradual shifts. Calder's company grew faster than anticipated. New opportunities demanded more attention, more travel, more meetings, more sacrifice. At first, Niall understood. She reminded herself that growth required adjustment, that love could stretch without breaking, that patience was part of partnership, and Calder reassured her, often without words, that she still mattered. But reassurance requires consistency, and slowly, subtly, that consistency began to fade. Calder started bringing work home, not physically, but mentally. Conversations drifted back to business. Evenings shortened. Presence thinned. Niall noticed, but she didn't panic. She believed love was resilient. What she didn't yet understand was that resilience without reciprocity becomes endurance, and endurance, over time, becomes exhaustion. Still, she stayed hopeful, because love, in its early chapters, always feels like it can overcome anything. And sometimes, that belief is what carries us forward, right up until reality asks us to reevaluate what love truly requires. Success didn't arrive in Calder Wynn's life like a celebration. It arrived like responsibility. One contract became three became 7. Meetings multiplied. Travel schedules filled. His name began appearing in places Niall never searched for, but somehow always noticed. Articles, interviews, quiet mentions in conversations that stopped when he entered the room. Calder handled it the way he handled everything. With control. He woke earlier, slept later, adjusted his days until they fit neatly into tightly packed schedules. He believed efficiency was a form of respect, not realizing that what he was slowly withdrawing was something far more personal: time. At first, Niel adapted easily. She had always been flexible, always understood the demands of ambition. She reminded herself that this phase was temporary. That growth came with seasons of imbalance. That love didn't disappear simply because attention shifted. Calder still came home, still kissed her forehead, still asked about her day. But the pauses between those moments began to stretch. Conversations shortened. Dinners were pushed later. Laughter became less frequent, not because it was gone, but because there was less room for it. Niel noticed small changes long before they became patterns. Calder checking his phone mid-conversation, answering emails during meals, mentally leaving rooms before physically exiting them. She didn't complain, not because she didn't feel it, but because she didn't want to become another pressure on his already full plate. This was her first lesson. Love often teaches us to be patient, but patience, when unspoken, can quietly turn into self-erasure. Calder didn't intend to drift. He believed he was building something for them, that every sacrifice now would secure their future. That provision could make up for absence. And in many ways, it did, on paper. Their life became more comfortable, more secure, more admired. But comfort is not connection. One evening, after Calder canceled dinner for the third time that week, Niel sat alone at the table longer than usual. The food went cold. The room stayed quiet. She realized then that loneliness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just waits. When Calder came home late that night, he apologized quickly, distractedly. Niel smiled and told him it was fine. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Over time, these moments stacked gently, like pages unread. Calder was present just enough to believe nothing was wrong. Niel was understanding, just enough to keep herself quiet. Neither noticed how far apart they were drifting, because there was no conflict to measure the distance. That was the danger. Calder's success continued accelerating. Invitations arrived from places he once admired from afar. Expectations followed him home. Even when he was there, his mind wasn't. Niel watched him from across the room one night as he worked late, laptop open, expression focused. She didn't feel anger. She felt invisible. That realization unsettled her more than any argument could have. Educational truth revealed quietly. Being needed is not the same as being loved. Calder needed her stability. He needed her understanding. But love requires something more intentional. Still, Niel stayed. She believed in seasons, in growth pains, in love that bends but doesn't break. What she didn't know was that bending without support eventually becomes strain, and strain left unaddressed, becomes distance. By the time either of them noticed the shift clearly, the silence between them had already learned how to live there. Loneliness rarely looks the way people expect it to. It doesn't always arrive with raised voices or slammed doors. Sometimes it slips into a home silently, taking shape in the empty spaces between conversations, in meals eaten alone, in questions no longer asked. Niall felt it most in the mornings. Calder would leave before sunrise, his movements careful not to wake her. She would hear the soft click of the door and lie still, staring at the ceiling, measuring time by the quiet hum of the city waking outside. At first, she told herself it was temporary. Then it became routine. Evenings weren't much different. Calder often came home exhausted, carrying the weight of decisions that followed him through the door. Niall welcomed him with warmth, asked about his day, listened as he spoke in fragments. But the conversations rarely traveled both ways anymore. Calder answered questions efficiently, as if he were closing out tasks rather than sharing moments. He didn't notice when Niall's responses grew shorter, when her stories lost their details. Not because he didn't care, because he didn't slow down enough to see. This was the second lesson Niall learned quietly. Love requires attention, not assumption. Calder assumed Niall understood. Niall assumed Calder would eventually notice. Assumptions filled the space where communication should have lived. They stopped arguing because there was nothing specific to argue about. Calder wasn't cruel. He wasn't unfaithful. He wasn't dismissive in obvious ways. He was simply absent without leaving. Niall found herself adjusting her expectations without realizing it. She planned dinners later, learned to fall asleep alone, celebrated small victories privately. And still, she didn't confront him. She feared that naming the distance might make it permanent. One evening, she waited for Calder longer than usual. The lights were dimmed, dinner warm, conversation rehearsed in her mind. She wanted to tell him she missed him, not physically, but emotionally. He arrived late, distracted, apologetic. She smiled and said nothing. That was the moment she felt something inside her shift, not break, but settle. Educational truth revealed. Silence chosen to preserve peace can quietly destroy intimacy. Calder, on his side, believed he was managing things well. From his perspective, there was stability. Niall wasn't upset. Their home was calm. There were no crises demanding attention. He didn't see that calm can sometimes mean resignation. The distance between them grew not from neglect alone, but from good intentions gone unexamined. Calder believed he was building a future for them. Niall believed she was supporting him through a demanding season. Neither realized that love doesn't survive on belief alone. It survives on presence. As weeks passed, Niall felt herself becoming smaller within the relationship. Not invisible, but quieter. She spoke less about her dreams, less about her work, less about her fears. Calder noticed none of it. By the time Niel discovered she was pregnant, the silence between them had already learned how to stay. The news should have been joyful, and part of it was, but fear followed quickly behind. Niel looked at the test alone in the bathroom, hands steady, heart racing. She thought of the life growing inside her, and of the emotional distance already shaping their home. She waited, not out of doubt, but out of hope. Hope that there would be a moment calm enough, quiet enough, meaningful enough to share something that would change everything. That moment never arrived, and when the words finally came, they would land not in a space prepared to receive them, but in the middle of everything Calder was already carrying. The silence that followed would be louder than any argument they never had. Niel Corwin discovered she was pregnant on a morning that felt entirely ordinary. The sky outside the bathroom window was pale, undecided between night and day. The apartment was still. Calder had already left for an early meeting, his side of the bed untouched by warmth. She hadn't expected the result. The test rested on the counter while she washed her hands, her movements slow, distracted. When she finally looked down, the world seemed to narrow around a single detail, clear, unmistakable. For a brief moment, joy arrived without hesitation, a quiet, luminous kind of joy. Then fear followed. Niel sank onto the edge of the tub, the weight of the realization settling into her chest. She placed a hand over her stomach instinctively, as if that small gesture could already offer protection. A child, life, possibility, and suddenly, every silence in her marriage felt heavier. She imagined telling Calder, the way his eyes might light. The way the news could pull him back into the present, remind him of the life they were building beyond schedules and deadlines. That hope stayed with her for days. Niel didn't rush to share the news. She wanted the moment to matter. She wanted to offer it to him when he could truly receive it, not between phone calls, not at the edge of exhaustion. She waited for an evening without interruptions. There were none. Each night followed the same pattern. Calder arrived late, distracted but apologetic. He kissed her cheek, asked about her day, then drifted back into emails or quiet thought. Niel watched him carefully, searching for an opening, a pause, a breath, a sign that he was fully there. The moment never came. Educational truth revealed gently, important conversations require emotional availability, not just time. Still, Niel held on to hope. She imagined the child's future, small hands gripping hers, laughter filling rooms that had grown too quiet. She believed that love, once reminded of its purpose, could reorient itself. When she finally told Calder, the words didn't come as she had planned. They slipped out on a weekday evening, tucked between apologies and updates, spoken softly as if she were asking permission. "I'm pregnant," she said. The room went still. Calder didn't react the way she expected. He didn't smile. He didn't ask questions. He froze, not with anger, but with calculation. Niel watched his face carefully as thoughts moved behind his eyes. Timelines, responsibilities, Ticks, the implications of a life that could not be scheduled or postponed. 1,000 considerations passed silently between them. Calder exhaled slowly. "We'll talk," he said, and then he turned back to his phone. Niall nodded. That was all. No argument followed. No harsh words, no dramatic response. Just silence. That night, Niall lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing even and steady, while her own thoughts raced. She stared at the ceiling, one hand resting protectively over her stomach, the other curled against the space between them. She realized then that fear doesn't always come from rejection. Sometimes it comes from uncertainty. Days passed. Then weeks. The conversation never resumed. Calder didn't ask how she was feeling, didn't mention the pregnancy, didn't bring it up at all. Niall waited, at first with patience, then with confusion, then with quiet hurt. Educational truth deepened. Avoidance is not neutral. It is a response, and often a painful one. Niall began to understand something she hadn't allowed herself to see before. Calder loved control, and a child, fragile, unpredictable, demanding, represented everything he could not control. That realization didn't make her angry. It made her sad. She stopped waiting for the right moment. Instead, she began preparing quietly. And in doing so, she started the process of choosing herself and the life growing inside her over the comfort of hoping someone else would change. At first, Niall tried to convince herself that Calder simply needed time. He had always processed things internally. Big decisions never came quickly with him. They were weighed, measured, examined from every angle before being addressed. That was one of the qualities that had once made her admire him. So she waited. She didn't bring up the pregnancy again. She didn't ask questions that might corner him. She gave him space, believing that silence, if handled gently, could be temporary. But silence has a way of settling in when it's welcomed. Days passed, then weeks. Calder's routine didn't change. He left early, returned late, filled the space between with obligations and responsibilities that demanded his attention. What changed was Niall. She became more aware of her body, of the subtle shifts taking place within her. Morning nausea, sudden exhaustion, a heightened sensitivity to sound and emotion. Each change reminded her that life was moving forward, whether Calder acknowledged it or not. One evening, she stood in the kitchen holding a glass of water, watching Calder speak animatedly into his phone about a deal that had finally closed. His voice carried excitement, relief, focus. She waited. When the call ended, she hoped, just briefly, that he might turn to her, notice the quiet expectation in her eyes, and remember. He didn't. That was when something inside her finally settled into clarity. Educational truth revealed quietly. When someone consistently avoids a subject that defines your future, they are choosing not to share that future with you. Niall stopped waiting for reassurance. Instead, she began to prepare. She scheduled her doctor's appointment alone, sat in waiting rooms by herself, listened to the steady heartbeat of the child growing inside her, without Calder's hand in hers. Each moment strengthened her resolve, not in bitterness, in acceptance. Calder noticed changes, but misread them. He saw Niel becoming quieter, and assumed she was simply tired. He mistook her composure for contentment. He didn't realize that she was slowly detaching, not emotionally, but practically. Niel began organizing her life in ways that no longer included him at the center. She reviewed finances, looked at apartments, researched support systems, not because she wanted to leave, but because she was preparing for the possibility that she would have to. One night, unable to carry the silence any longer, she finally spoke. "Calder," she said softly. He looked up, distracted. "Just a second." "No," she interrupted gently. Now, something in her tone made him pause. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply stood there, steady, grounded. "You said we'd talk," she said. "And we haven't." Calder exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. "I've had a lot going on." "I know," Niel replied, "but so do I." For a moment, it seemed like he might finally engage. He opened his mouth, then hesitated. "I'm not saying no," he said carefully. "I just need time to think." Niel nodded. "I've given you time," she said. "What I haven't been given is presence." Calder had no answer. That silence, standing between them, said everything. Niel didn't argue further. She didn't need to, because clarity had already arrived. That night, as Calder slept beside her, Niel lay awake once more, hand resting over her stomach. She felt the quiet strength growing within her, a resolve shaped not by anger, but by love. Love for the child who deserved certainty. Love for herself, for the woman she was becoming. By morning, the decision was made. She would leave? Not dramatically, not loudly, but with intention. And Calder, for the first time, would be left with a silence he could no longer ignore. Niel didn't leave immediately. She didn't pack a suitcase in the middle of the night or announce her decision with tears and accusations. Instead, she moved through the days with a steady calm that surprised even her. Leaving, she realized, didn't require drama. It required clarity. The morning after her conversation with Calder, she woke before dawn. The apartment was quiet, the city still half asleep. She stood by the window for a long moment, one hand resting gently over her stomach, feeling a sense of resolve she hadn't known before. This wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. Calder moved through the apartment as he always did, efficient, focused, already mentally preparing for the day ahead. He kissed her forehead, absent-mindedly, murmured something about a meeting, and left. Niel watched the door close. She didn't feel anger. She felt certainty. Educational truth revealed softly. When someone shows you where you fit in their life, believe them. Niel began preparing quietly. She organized documents, reviewed finances, looked at apartments that were modest but bright, places where silence felt peaceful rather than heavy. She scheduled appointments on her own and built routines that no longer revolved around Calder's availability. Each step strengthened her, not because it was easy, but because it was honest. Calder noticed changes, but didn't question them. He assumed Niel was adjusting to pregnancy, that her quietness was temporary. He mistook her independence for resilience. He didn't see that she was reclaiming herself. Days turned into weeks. The silence between them thickened, not awkward, but final. They spoke about logistics, schedules, mundane things, but the conversations that mattered remained untouched. Niel stopped trying to fill the gaps. Instead, she listened, and what she heard was nothing. One afternoon, as she folded clothes in the bedroom, she realized something important. She no longer felt lonely when Calder wasn't there. That realization frightened her more than anything else, because loneliness had been replaced with peace. Educational truth deepened. Peace is not the absence of love. It's the presence of self-respect. When Niel finally told Calder she was leaving, she chose her words carefully. "I'm going to stay somewhere else for a while," she said calmly one evening. Calder looked up, surprised, but not alarmed. "For how long?" he asked. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "As long as I need." He nodded slowly, as if processing a change in schedule rather than a shift in their marriage. "Okay," he said. "We'll figure it out." Niel waited for more. A question, a protest, a request for her to stay. None came. That was the moment it became final. Calder didn't stop her, and Niel understood then that love cannot survive where curiosity no longer exists. She packed carefully, deliberately, not everything, just what she needed. The rest she left behind, symbols of a life that no longer fit. As she closed the door behind her, Niel felt lighter, not because the choice was painless, but because it was right. Silence had answered her, and she had finally listened. Niel's new apartment was smaller than the life she had left behind. The walls were plain, the furniture modest. The windows didn't overlook the city in the way Calder's penthouse did, but they let in morning light, and that felt like enough. The first night alone, she sat on the edge of the bed and listened. Not for footsteps, not for doors opening, for herself. The quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt honest. She unpacked slowly, placing familiar objects where they made sense to her, not where they fit a shared vision. Each small decision reminded her that she was capable of building a life that didn't require someone else's permission. Educational truth revealed gently. Starting over doesn't mean starting empty. It means starting intentionally. Calder, meanwhile, moved through his days unchanged. At first, he noticed the apartment felt different when he came home, but he attributed it to routine disruptions. He told himself Niel needed space, that she would return when things settled. He didn't ask where she went. He didn't visit. He assumed stability would restore itself. That assumption followed him into empty rooms. Nielle's life, however, began to find its rhythm. She established routines that centered her well-being and the child growing inside her. Morning walks, doctor visits, quiet evenings filled with reflection rather than waiting. She learned to trust her own strength. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was holding her breath. Calder felt the absence in subtler ways. There was no one to ask how his day truly was. No one to notice the fatigue behind his composure. The quiet that once felt manageable began to echo. But instead of reaching out, he filled the silence with work. Educational truth mirrored quietly. Distraction can delay pain, but it can't erase it. Weeks passed. Nielle felt the baby move for the first time one evening as she lay in bed, hand resting gently on her stomach. The sensation startled her, soft, unmistakable. Tears welled, not from sadness, but from awe. She realized then that she was no longer waiting for Calder to choose her. She had chosen herself. Calder's realization came slower. One night, he returned home to an apartment that felt colder than usual. He stood in the doorway longer than necessary, noticing details he had overlooked before, the empty hooks, the quiet corners. He felt something unfamiliar then. Regret. But regret, like silence, arrived late. Nielle's life moved forward without him, not out of spite, but necessity. And Calder, standing alone in a space built for two, began to understand that some absences are permanent, not because they're dramatic, but because they go unanswered. If this chapter resonated with you, if you've ever had to walk away quietly to protect your peace, or if you've learned that silence can be an answer, please like this video so this story can reach others who may be facing the same choice. I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe staying silent preserves love, or does it slowly destroy it? And if you're drawn to love stories that reflect real life, stories about choices, growth, and self-respect, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson so you don't miss what happens next. Because sometimes walking away isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of understanding. Motherhood did not arrive in Nielle Corwin's life with fear. It arrived with focus. As her pregnancy progressed, her world narrowed in the most meaningful way. What once felt uncertain began to feel deliberate. Each day carried purpose, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Her mornings started slowly. Gentle routines replaced rushed expectations. She learned to listen to her body, to rest without guilt, to honor the changes taking place within her. The baby's movements became familiar, small reminders that life was growing, responding, trusting her. Nielle realized something important during those months. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply adapts. She attended appointments alone, but she didn't feel abandoned. The quiet support she once sought from Calder had been replaced by a deeper self-trust. She asked questions, took notes, prepared thoughtfully. Her apartment transformed into a space shaped by intention rather than compromise. A corner for the crib. Soft light near the window. Calm colors that reflected peace rather than prestige. Educational truth revealed gently. Building a life aligned with your values creates stability no one else can provide. Meanwhile, Calder Wynn's life moved forward with precision. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. His company expanded into new markets. His schedule was full. His presence commanded respect. The world continued to affirm the choices he had made, and eventually, Sorrel Dane stepped fully into that world beside him. She fit seamlessly. Sorrel understood calendars and commitments. She didn't ask for long conversations. After exhausting days, she admired Calder's discipline and never questioned his priorities. With her, things felt efficient, manageable. Calder appreciated that. He told himself that comfort mattered. That compatibility meant shared pace. That calm was same as connection. But calm without depth has a way of revealing itself over time. Niel, unaware of the details of Calder's new life, focused inward. She read, she reflected, she prepared emotionally as much as physically. She allowed herself to imagine a future shaped by honesty rather than expectation. The birth came on a rainy morning. Quiet, steady, purposeful. Niel named him Elio. Light, because even in uncertainty, he felt like that. Holding Elio for the first time changed something fundamental within her. Fear didn't vanish, but it took a back seat to clarity. She wasn't waiting anymore. She was living. Educational truth deepened. Love becomes stronger when it's rooted in responsibility and intention. Across the city, Calder stood in boardrooms and glass offices, making decisions that shaped skylines. Yet there was a part of his life he never revisited. The silence he once ignored had learned how to echo. He didn't know it yet. But the life he believed he had stabilized was quietly missing its most meaningful foundation. Sorrel Dane entered Calder Wynn's life without disruption. There was no dramatic beginning, no moment that demanded emotional adjustment. She appeared the way well-planned meetings did, on time, prepared, aligned with expectations. Sorrel understood the language of success. She spoke it fluently. Calendars, deadlines, public appearances. These were not burdens to her, but structure. She admired Calder's discipline and respected his ambition without trying to soften it. With Sorrel, Calder's life felt organized, predictable, and for a man who thrived on control, that felt like relief. She didn't ask him to slow down, didn't ask him to talk when he was tired, didn't question his absences. She filled the spaces that fit conveniently around his schedule. From the outside, they made sense. At public events, Sorrel stood beside him, with ease, composed and polished. She knew when to speak, when to smile, when to step back. She complemented the image Calder had spent years building. Calder appreciated that she required little explanation. But appreciation is not intimacy. Niel, meanwhile, learned the language of motherhood. Her days were shaped by rhythm rather than structure. Feedings, sleep, gentle adjustments. She listened to Elio the way she once listened to Calder. Carefully, attentively, fully present. Each small milestone reinforced her confidence. She didn't feel the absence of the life she had left behind. She felt the presence of the one she was building. Educational truth revealed softly. Growth often requires releasing what no longer fits, even if it once felt essential. Calder noticed changes in himself, but misinterpreted them. He believed he was calmer now, less conflicted. His relationship with Sorrel lacked friction, and he mistook that ease for fulfillment. Yet something was missing. There were moments, quiet, unguarded ones, when he caught himself wanting to share something meaningful, only to realize there was no space for it. Conversations stayed efficient, functional, comfortable, but shallow. Sorrel didn't notice the absence of depth. She had never asked for it, and Calder didn't know how to ask for it either. Niel, holding Elio close one evening, understood something that Calder had not yet realized. Love is not about fitting into someone's life. It's about building a life together. The paths they had chosen were now clearly different. One toward peace, rooted in intention. The other toward stability, without reflection. Both looked successful from the outside. Only one felt complete. From the outside, Calder Wynn's life looked settled. His company was thriving. His public appearances were polished. Sorrel Dane stood beside him with practiced ease, her presence signaling balance and composure. Together, they looked like a partnership built for success. And in many ways, they were. Their relationship ran smoothly. There were no disagreements about priorities, no emotional demands that disrupted Calder's schedule. Sorrel respected his boundaries and admired his focus. With her, love felt manageable. But manageability is not the same as meaning. Calder noticed it in small moments. When something unexpected happened, good or bad, his instinct was to process it alone. He didn't feel the urge to share deeply, only to report efficiently. Sorrel listened, nodded, offered support in measured ways. She was kind, but she didn't reach beneath the surface. And Calder didn't invite her to. Educational truth revealed quietly. When a relationship requires nothing from you emotionally, it may not be asking for enough. Niel, meanwhile, had grown into a different kind of strength. Motherhood had reshaped her sense of self. She moved through her days with intention, grounded by the needs of the life she carried. Elio's presence filled her world with clarity rather than chaos. She didn't measure time by availability anymore. She measured it by meaning. Her evenings were quiet, but full. Lullabies replaced conversations that once trailed off, unanswered. She learned the rhythm of Elio's needs and trusted her instincts without hesitation. She no longer wondered what Calder was doing. That chapter of waiting had closed. Calder felt the absence of that connection in unexpected ways. There were moments when success felt hollow, celebrated publicly, but not shared intimately. He missed being seen without performing, missed conversations that challenged him gently rather than accommodating him completely. But instead of questioning his choices, he reassured himself with logic. Stability matters. Ease matters. Peace matters. And yet, something still felt unresolved. Nielle's life continued forward without reference to Calder's. She built friendships rooted in honesty. She created a home shaped by warmth rather than image. Educational truth deepened. True fulfillment grows when your life aligns with your values, not when it impresses others. Calder, standing beside Sorrel at another public event, felt a flicker of recognition he quickly dismissed. The silence he once relied on had followed him. And this time, it wasn't empty. It's asking questions. Elio arrived on a morning, washed in rain. The sky was heavy, clouds pressing low, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Nielle barely noticed the weather as she focused on the rhythm of her own breathing, the steady reassurance of voices guiding her through each moment. There was no panic. Lee purpose. Hours later, when she finally held Elio against her chest, everything else fell away. The noise, the past, the waiting. He was warm, real, present. Nielle studied his face with quiet wonder, memorizing features she knew would change too quickly. His tiny fingers curled instinctively around hers, anchoring her to a truth she felt deep in her bones. She had done this not alone, but on her own terms. Educational truth revealed gently, sometimes strength isn't proven by what we endure, but by what we choose to protect. Motherhood settled into Nielle's life with a calm she hadn't anticipated. The days blurred together, shaped by feedings, naps, and moments of awe that arrived without warning. Exhaustion came, but it was accompanied by fulfillment. She no longer questioned her decisions. The doubts that once followed her had quieted, replaced by trust in herself. Elio didn't ask for perfection. He asked for presence. Nielle gave it freely. Across the city, Calder-Wynn's life continued at its usual pace, but something subtle had shifted. He stood in a glass-walled office overlooking the city one evening, lights glowing below, when an unexpected sense of emptiness crept in. The success surrounding him felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. He tried to pinpoint the feeling. Fatigue, he told himself. Pressure. Yet it lingered. Sorrel noticed changes she couldn't quite name. Calder was quieter, more distracted, not unhappy, but not fully engaged either. She didn't question it. Her role had never been to probe, and Calder didn't explain. Nielle, rocking Elio late one night, felt gratitude settle into her chest. Not the loud kind, but the steady assurance that she was exactly where she needed to be. She whispered promises to him then about honesty. Oh, well, up. About choosing love with intention. Educational truth deepened. The love we give shapes the life we build. Calder's unease grew quietly. He began noticing the absence of someone who once saw him beyond his achievements. He missed being known rather than admired, missed conversations that didn't revolve around outcomes. But instead of reaching backward, he moved forward. He told himself that growth required sacrifice. He didn't yet understand what the sacrifice had been. Niel, meanwhile, slept peacefully for the first time in years. Elio close, her heart steady. The light she carried forward wasn't just her son. It was clarity. Life with Elio settled into a rhythm Niel had never known before. Not rushed, not uncertain, but steady. Her days no longer revolved around what might happen, or what someone else might decide. They were shaped by needs that were immediate and honest. Feeding times, gentle walks, quiet afternoons filled with soft light and lullabies that grew more familiar with each passing day. Niel noticed how motherhood had sharpened her sense of self. She trusted her instincts now. She made decisions without second-guessing whether they would inconvenience someone else. She learned quickly that caring for another life required presence, not perfection. Educational truth revealed gently. Responsibility clarifies priorities faster than reflection ever could. Elio thrived in her care. His smiles came easily. His cries softened quickly when she held him close. Each response reaffirmed something Niel had once doubted, that she was capable, steady, and strong. She no longer felt the urge to explain her choices. They spoke for themselves. Across the city, Calder Wynn's life followed its familiar pattern. Until it didn't. The envelope arrived without ceremony. Plain, official, final. Calder opened it between meetings, expecting routine correspondence. When he read the words, something tightened in his chest. Divorce proceedings. He stared at the document longer than necessary, scanning details he already understood. Dates, signatures, formal language that reduced years of shared life into terms and clauses. Niel had moved forward without asking, and for the first time, Calder felt something he hadn't anticipated. Displacement. Educational truth mirrored quietly. Assuming someone will wait is a decision, one that carries consequences. He told Sorrel that evening with practiced calm. She listened carefully, her expression composed. "When is the hearing?" she asked. "In a few weeks." She nodded. "We'll plan around it." Her response was efficient, supportive, but it wasn't curious. Calder noticed that, too. Niel, meanwhile, prepared without anxiety. She read through documents calmly, organized what needed to be done. She didn't feel the weight she once imagined would accompany this moment. Closure, she realized, doesn't always hurt. Sometimes it simply confirms what you already know. As the date approached, Niel reflected quietly on how far she had come. The woman who once waited for conversations that never happened was gone. In her place stood someone grounded in certainty. Educational truth deepened. Healing doesn't erase the past. It repositions it. Calder, on the other hand, found himself restless. The silence he once embraced now felt exposed. The upcoming meeting forced him to acknowledge a chapter he had left unresolved. Not through conflict, but through neglect. He didn't know yet that the moment would change him. Niel did, because she would not arrive alone. Niel didn't think of the upcoming court date as an ending. She thought of it as a crossing. In the weeks leading up to it, her life remained steady. Elio grew stronger, more alert. His eyes followed her across the room now, curious and calm. When he smiled, it felt like reassurance, silent confirmation that she had made the right choices. She prepared thoughtfully, not emotionally. Documents were organized neatly. Timelines reviewed. Conversations rehearsed only enough to remain clear, never defensive. Niel wasn't interested in revisiting old wounds. She had already healed. Educational truth revealed gently. Closure doesn't require confrontation. It requires acceptance. Choosing what to wear that day took more thought than she expected. Not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she wanted to feel like herself. She settled on something simple, comfortable, honest. She would arrive as she was now, not as the woman she used to be. Calder's preparation looked different. He felt restless in ways he couldn't quite name. His routine no longer steadied him. Meetings blurred together. Even success felt muted, as if it were happening at a distance. Sorrel noticed. "You've been distracted," she said one evening. Calder nodded. "Just a lot on my mind." She didn't ask what. That, too, was part of their rhythm. Educational truth mirrored quietly. What goes unspoken often defines a relationship more than what is said. As the date drew closer, Calder found himself replaying memories he hadn't revisited in years. Early conversations, shared silences, the way Niel used to look at him, not with expectation, but with belief. He wondered when he had stopped asking her questions. Niel, rocking Elio to sleep the night before the hearing, felt calm settle over her. She kissed his forehead gently, whispering promises about honesty, courage, and presence. She wasn't bringing him for effect. She was bringing him because he was her life now. The morning of the hearing arrived quietly. The city moved, as it always did, unaware that something deeply personal was about to unfold on its courthouse steps. Niel dressed carefully, wrapping Elio in a soft blanket before stepping outside. The air was cool, the sky overcast. She inhaled deeply. Across the city, Calder adjusted his tie in the mirror, his reflection unfamiliar. Sorrel stood nearby, composed and prepared. They drove in silence. When they arrived, the courthouse loomed ahead, solid, unyielding. Niel stood at the bottom of the steps for a moment, steadying herself. Elio slept peacefully in her arms. She didn't know how Calder would react. She didn't need to, because this moment wasn't about him anymore. As she climbed the steps, one truth carried her forward. She wasn't returning to the past. She was closing it. The courthouse steps felt colder than Niel remembered, not because the air had changed, but because she had. She paused at the bottom for a brief moment, adjusting the blanket around Elio with practiced care. He slept soundly, unaware of where he was or why this place mattered. His breathing was slow, steady, grounding her. Niel welcomed that steadiness. 3 years ago, she had climbed these same steps, holding documents that promised permanence. Her heart had been light then, hopeful in ways she hadn't yet learned to protect. Today, her heart was calm. Across the street, a black luxury sedan idled, polished to perfection. Inside sat Calder Wynne. He watched Niel from behind the tinted glass, a strange tightness settling in his chest. Seeing her again felt disorienting. Not because she looked different, but because she didn't look unfinished anymore. She looked whole. Sorrel sat beside him, composed as ever, her posture flawless. She noticed the way Calder's attention never left Niel, the way his body leaned forward, almost imperceptibly. "That?" she began, then stopped. Calder didn't answer. The door opened. He stepped out first. His movements measured, familiar. The man the world knew returned automatically. Tailored suit, controlled expression, steady pace. Sorrel followed, her hand resting lightly on his arm. It was meant to signal unity. Niel saw them together and felt nothing sharp or bitter, only distance. Educational truth revealed quietly. Healing isn't the absence of memory. It's the absence of pain tied to it. Calder noticed the baby then. At first, his mind refused to register what his eyes were seeing. A small bundle held securely in Niel's arms. The soft rise and fall of a chest, too small to be anything else. His steps slowed. Something in his expression shifted. Not shock, but realization arriving all at once. Sorrel felt it, too. She tightened her grip slightly, her eyes flicking from Niel to the baby, then back to Calder. Questions formed quickly, but none were asked. Nell climbed the steps slowly, deliberately. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate. She wasn't here to surprise anyone. She was here to conclude. Elio stirred briefly, opening his eyes, as if sensing the change in air. Niel rocked him gently, instinctively. Calder's breath caught. The resemblance was undeniable, not in any single feature, but in the familiarity of expression. Something about the set of the eyes, the calm presence. Recognition settled heavily. Educational truth deepened. Some realizations don't announce themselves. They arrive complete. Calder looked at Niel then, searching her face for something. Anger, accusation, triumph. He found none of it. Her gaze was steady, clear, unafraid. Sorrel felt the shift immediately. She understood then, not everything, but enough. Calder never looked at her. Not once. Inside the courthouse, names were being called. The routine of the day continued uninterrupted, indifferent to the emotional weight unfolding on the steps outside. Niel reached the top and turned slightly, giving Calder a brief nod of acknowledgement. Nothing more. That small gesture carried finality. As they moved toward the entrance, Calder followed a step behind her, not intentionally, but instinctively. Sorrel hesitated, then followed him. For the first time, the order felt wrong. Niel entered the building, carrying the life she had built, without permission. Calder entered, carrying the weight of everything he hadn't asked. And in that quiet procession, the past and present met, not with confrontation, but with clarity. Inside the courthouse, the air felt heavier, not thick with noise, but dense with restraint. Voices were kept low. Footsteps echoed softly against polished floors. Lives were being rearranged quietly behind closed doors, one signature at a time. Niel took a seat near the wall, Elio resting peacefully in her arms. She adjusted the blanket again, a small, habitual motion that steadied her. The room smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, neutral, impersonal. Calder sat across from her. Sorrel chose the seat beside him, posture straight, expression composed. From the outside, she looked calm, but inside, something had shifted. She had noticed it on the steps. The way Calder's attention had narrowed, the way he had gone still. She had never seen him like that. Educational truth revealed quietly. Sometimes, the most important answers are given in silence. The judge entered. Formalities began. Names were read aloud, stripped of the intimacy they once carried. Dates and details followed, reducing years of shared life into structured language. Niel listened attentively. Calder listened too, but not to the words. His focus kept returning to the baby, to the soft sounds Elio made in his sleep, to the gentle way Niel held him, as if nothing else in the room mattered more, because to her nothing did. Sorrel followed Calder's gaze, and finally allowed herself to look closely at the child. The resemblance was no longer something she could dismiss. Understanding settled slowly. She felt no anger toward Niel, only clarity. Educational truth deepened. Being chosen for convenience is not the same as being chosen for love. When the judge asked if there were any objections, Calder opened his mouth, then closed it. He had none, not because he agreed with every outcome, but because he had already made his choices long before this moment arrived. Niel signed first. Her hand didn't shake. She felt relief, not because something was ending, but because something unresolved was finally being acknowledged. Calder signed next. He paused briefly, the pen hovering above the page, then continued. The motion felt heavier than expected. Sorrel watched him closely. She noticed something then, something she had ignored for months. Calder never once looked at her, not for reassurance, not for connection, not even out of habit. His focus remained fixed on Niel and the life she carried forward. That realization settled with quiet finality. The judge nodded, signaling completion. "It's done," he said. Niel rose slowly, adjusting Elio once more. She didn't look back at Calder immediately. She didn't need to. Calder spoke as she turned to leave. "You didn't tell me?" he said quietly. Niel stopped. She met his eyes, not with resentment, but with honesty. "You didn't ask, eh?" The words weren't sharp. They were true. Educational truth crystallized. Love doesn't survive on assumption. It survives on curiosity. Niel walked away then, her steps steady, her heart light. Calder remained seated for a moment, longer than necessary, the weight of what he had ignored pressing in. Sorrel stood beside him, silent. She understood now. Not everything, but enough. As Niel exited the courthouse, sunlight broke through the clouds briefly, illuminating the steps outside. She inhaled deeply, holding Elio close. She had come here to end something. She left, having confirmed who she had become. The courthouse doors closed behind Niel with a soft, final sound. Not dramatic, not heavy, just complete. She paused at the top of the steps, adjusting Elio in her arms as sunlight brushed across his face. He stirred slightly, then relaxed again, trusting the steadiness that held him. Niel smiled, not because the past no longer existed, but because it no longer defined her. She walked down the steps slowly, feeling lighter than she had in years. Each step felt deliberate, grounded. She wasn't rushing away from something. She was moving toward herself. Educational truth revealed gently. Closure doesn't always come with answers. It comes with acceptance. Inside the courthouse, Calder remained seated long after Niel had gone. The room felt emptier now, though nothing physical had changed. Papers lay neatly stacked. Chairs sat exactly where they had been moments before. Yet, something essential had shifted. Calder stared at the signed documents in front of him, struggling to reconcile the simplicity of the act with the magnitude of its meaning. Years reduced to ink and paper. A life altered without confrontation. He replayed the moment in his mind. "You didn't ask." The words echoed, not accusing, not cruel, just true. He realized then that love hadn't left him suddenly. He slowly stopped reaching for it. Educational truth deepened. Neglect doesn't announce itself, but it always leaves evidence. Sorrel stood quietly near the door, observing him without interruption. She had always known when to remain silent, but this silence felt different. It wasn't comfortable. It was clarifying. She saw now that Calder's distance hadn't begun with Niel's departure. It had existed long before, masked by ambition, justified by responsibility. Had fit neatly into that space, not as a partner in depth, but as a solution. Sorrel didn't resent Niel. She understood her. What unsettled Sorrel most was not the child or the past, but the realization that Calder's heart had never fully arrived in their present. Educational truth revealed quietly. A relationship built on convenience rarely withstands reflection. Calder finally stood, straightening his jacket, out of habit. The gesture felt automatic, detached from meaning. He turned toward Sorrel, ready to say something, anything that might restore balance. But the words didn't come. There was nothing left to manage. Outside, Niel reached her car and secured Elio carefully in his seat. She sat behind the wheel for a moment longer than necessary, breathing deeply, allowing the finality of it all to settle. She felt no urge to look back. Her life no longer required permission from the past. As she drove away, the city unfolded before her, familiar yet different, not because the world had changed, but because she had. Inside the courthouse, Calder took one last look at the room before leaving. It felt smaller now, stripped of illusion. The silence he once controlled had turned into a mirror, and it reflected everything he had ignored. Niel drove slowly, letting the distance between herself and the courthouse grow naturally. She didn't rush to escape the moment. She allowed it to settle, fully, honestly, knowing that rushing past endings often leaves pieces behind. At a red light, she glanced in the rear-view mirror and caught her own reflection. For a brief second, she barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Not because she had changed outwardly, but because she no longer carried the weight she once mistook for love. Elio stirred softly in his seat, a small sound that anchored her to the present. Niel reached back instinctively, resting her fingers against the edge of his blanket. "I've got you," she whispered, and for the first time in a long while, she believed it completely. Educational truth revealed gently. Real strength is knowing you can move forward without looking back. Calder left the courthouse alone. Sorrel had excused herself quietly, offering a composed smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. There was no argument, no accusation, just understanding. Arriving late, but arriving nonetheless. Outside, Calder stood on the steps, where everything had unraveled and clarified all at once. The city moved around him, cars passing, people walking, lives continuing. He felt oddly still. For years, he had believed control was the foundation of stability, that if he managed every variable carefully enough, nothing important would slip through his hands. Now he understood the flaw in that belief. Some things don't need managing. They need presence. Educational truth deepened. Love cannot survive on intention alone. It requires attention. Calder replayed moments he had dismissed as minor. Missed dinners, postponed conversations. The night Niel stood in front of him, asking, not for answers, but for engagement. He had chosen silence then, and silence had chosen for him. Sorrel, walking toward her car, paused briefly. She didn't feel betrayed. She felt awakened. She realized that she, too, had accepted something incomplete because it was easy to carry. Convenience had felt like peace, but peace without depth had an expiration date. Educational truth mirrored softly. Being chosen should feel like connection, not accommodation. Niel arrived home just as the afternoon light spilled warmly through the windows. She carried Elio inside, moving with practiced ease, and placed him gently in his crib. She stood there for a long moment, watching him sleep. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and honesty, she had learned, was the most stable foundation of all. She didn't think about what Calder might be feeling. She didn't wonder whether he would regret anything. Those questions no longer belonged to her. What belonged to her was the present, the steady rhythm of motherhood, the peace she had earned through difficult choices, and the knowledge that she had honored herself when it mattered most. Educational truth crystallized: choosing yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. Outside, the city continued its quiet hum. Inside, Niel smiled. She had arrived at the divorce, holding a newborn, but she left holding something even more powerful: clarity. If this story moved you, if you've ever stayed silent too long, or walked away quietly to protect your peace, please like this video so this message can reach others who need it. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What lesson from this story stayed with you the most? And if you believe love stories should heal as much as they entertain, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson for more stories about love, growth, and life lessons that truly matter. Thank you for listening.